And on to the topic of today's event. I am super excited to host Melissa Roemmele as the guest speaker at today's event. We connected with Melissa through PyLady South Florida back in 2021. And that's when AI was still a fun fringe technology with a lot of potential. And today, some might say it's the force behind a major evolutionary shift for humanity. So I'm super excited to have Melissa back and to hear all about her team's at Midjourney Storytelling Lab uh, research. And Melissa, please take it away.
Thanks so much for having me. So today I'm going to be talking about envisioning stories with generative AI. So let me give a brief introduction about who I am. So I'm a research scientist. I have a background in computer science and linguistics. And what I'm passionate about most is exploring how to use generative AI to support human creativity. I'm currently part of the Midjourney Storytelling Lab. So with my team, I develop and evaluate AI augmented storytelling tools. Just a few notes about what I'm going to be talking about today. I do want to emphasize a particular perspective I'm taking with this talk, and it aligns with the nature of my work. So I'm discussing generative AI models as general technologies rather than comparing and contrasting any particular products like Midjourney versus ChatGPT versus Gemini, for instance. This is important because there's an ever-increasing number of generative AI products, but my focus is really on studying the capabilities of technologies as they relate to open research problems. So in the tutorial portion of this talk, later, I'll mention some specific model names for implementation purposes, but otherwise I'm going to be using general terms like text-image model or large language model to refer to classes of technologies rather than any one particular product that might be labeled under this class. So just want to note that. Another thing I want to acknowledge up front is that generative AI models do raise important ethical concerns, for example, around consent, copyright, potential misuse. I won't be able to cover those concerns in the scope of this talk, but it is important to acknowledge that these models do carry some risks. Okay, so I want to start by defining text-to-image models. As implied by the name, text-to-image models are a generative AI technology that turns text into images. The input text is typically referred to as a prompt, and the output is an image that's intended to depict the prompt. So, for example, if you have a prompt, serene beach at sunset with vibrant orange, pink, and purple sky, calm waves, swaying palm tree in foreground, and silhouetted sailboat on horizon, you put this into a text to image model, you get an image that depicts that particular prompt. So, from a creation standpoint, a key novelty of text image models is that they use open-ended natural language as a control panel for creation. This is important because it contrasts with other visual design tools where the control panel consists of more traditional elements like buttons, menus, or sliders. These types of conventional elements do use language to some degree, but it's a more constrained language, like a fixed set of labels. So text image models are really unique in focusing the creation experience on the process of articulating a vision in words. And one perspective that I've gained in working with these models is that they're also a new way to explore language. So, for example, they enable you to observe concrete interpretations of abstract or ambiguous text. So each of these examples here, these texts, have a meaning that arguably is somewhat unclear or hard to interpret. By putting them as prompts into a text image model, the resulting output suggests some particular meaning of the text that I think is interesting to reflect on further. So, with that context in mind about the benefits of text image models, the focus of what I'll be talking about today is on story visualization. And so, story visualization is the task of transforming a story from text into visual form. So, everyone has probably had the experience of enjoying a movie adaptation of a book that they've read. So intuitively, you know that this visual transformation can bring a compelling new perspective to a story you're already familiar with. So by mentioning this, I'm kind of already alluding to a motivation to use text image models for story visualization. I just pitched that these models are a new way to engage with language in general, and so they also might offer a new way to engage with stories. So before I talk about applying text image models for story visualization, I'm going to zoom out a bit and outline what makes story visualization challenging from an AI research perspective. So there's two broad dimensions to this endeavor of transforming stories into visual form, regardless of whatever particular model or approach you're taking. And the first challenge pertains to text image alignment, which is that ensuring that the resulting visualization is a faithful depiction of the story text. The second dimension is image to image alignment. And this emerges when your visualization consists of multiple images, which is common, especially for long stories. You have to ensure that the story elements, like the characters, the settings, the objects, are portrayed consistently between images. Obviously, you want it to be clear who's who and what's what in the visualization so that the overall visualization can be perceived as coherent. This second dimension is extremely important to the task, but the work that I'm going to discuss today focuses more on the first problem. So I'm going to scope the second problem out of this talk. So there's an imaginary app that I have in mind as a use case for story visualization. I'm calling it in this talk the visual e-reader. The speculative design of this app it's an e-reader app where you can select any piece of text in a book and see that selection visualized as an image. So this will be the inspiration for what I'm going to be talking about in the following slides. You could imagine that this app could be powered by a text to image model. So just to clarify some terminology that I'm going to be using here in the upcoming slides, in the design that I'm imagining for this visual e-reader app, you can select any amount of text to be visualized. So in my work, I refer to this selection as a story fragment. And I want to clarify this isn't to be confused with what people might call a sentence fragment or an ungrammatical section of a sentence. I'm using the term fragment to refer to a selection of text of any size. So it can be anything from a single word or phrase, a sentence, or even multiple sentences. The text to image model is expected to depict whatever fragment is selected in this design. So with this design, a key question is what should the exact prompt, the input be to instruct the model to portray a selected fragment? So I'm going to walk through some examples exploring this question and focus on one particular story. So the story is Ellen dreamed of winning a prize for her roses. She planned to enter her special purple rose at the fair. She fertilized the rose bush and covered it each night. The roses grew more beautiful every day. Ellen ended up winning the prize. So let's imagine that the specific fragment we want to visualize is this, the last part of the story, or the last sentence, Ellen ended up winning the prize. So the simplest approach in specifying the prompt is just to use that selected fragment itself as the prompt. This has a pretty obvious limitation in that if you just take the fragment, you're excluding all of the story context, which gives some meaning to the fragment. So that's why I'm referring to this strategy as the no context strategy. And what you get in the output demonstrates this limitation of the lacking context. So it's pretty obvious in the output that there's missing context here, and that particularly we have a representation of a prize, but no indication of what the prize is for or who it's going to. So this seems to be an insufficient strategy. So we probably do want to include some of the story context in the prompt then. Well, one way to do this is just to insert the entire story before the fragment in the prompt, and then have some instructions to the model that indicate that the story should be taken into account with reference to the fragment. So for example, you could have a prompt that says, consider this story. You insert the entire story there, and then based on this context, illustrate this fragment of the story. Ellen ended up winning the prize. This I'm calling the verbose context strategy because you're exhaustively including all of the story in the prompt. But interestingly, this can result in a generated image that has the same problem as when too little context is given. So for instance, here we have a rose, but we have no depiction of the prize or someone winning the prize. It's almost like the model doesn't really know what to focus on depicting with this prompt. So maybe it's just too much context, and the prompt needs to only focus on the context that's most relevant to the fragment. So we could go back to using the fragment by itself as the prompt, but then edit it to summarize the story context. So the objective here is to have a version of the fragment that's interpretable on its own without having to read the story. So in this case, that prompt could be the woman who had carefully tended her special purple rose bush ended up winning the prize at the fair. And I'm calling this prompting strategy the succinct context strategy because it represents the context, but more succinctly than the verbose context strategy. So when you use that as the prompt for the text image model, you do get your result does encode more context. But the output still doesn't necessarily depict what's taking place in this particular fragment. So for instance, here we see someone who could be Ellen tending to her roses. The image might be an okay representation of the story overall if we're just trying to generate one single image for the entire story. But with regard to this particular fragment, we don't see her winning a prize, so it doesn't seem like it's specific enough to this one fragment. So from these results, we might consider that we can't rely so directly on the text of the story when prompting the model. A different approach is to interpret the fragment as a scene and describe all the details of what you'd see in the scene corresponding to that fragment. So we can refer to this type of prompt as a scene description. So an example for this fragment of a scene description could be a beaming woman with gardening gloves stands proudly next to a vibrant purple rose bush in full bloom. She's holding a large blue ribbon that reads first prize and a golden trophy. The scene is set at a county fair with other flower displays and people visible in the background. You can see that the scene description articulates a lot of information that's implied by the story, but is not necessarily made explicit in the fragment. So, for instance, that Ellen is smiling because she won, that the roses are the specific reason for the prize, that there's physical objects like a ribbon and trophy associated with the prize, and that the prize was specifically given out at the county fair. So when you articulate these visual details in the scene description, the model output is a more suitable depiction of what's happening in this specific fragment. So these examples that I just went through actually reflect one of the findings from a study I published with my team. And in this study, we generated visualizations of story fragments with the different prompting strategies I just outlined. We conducted an evaluation where we asked people to judge which of two images they perceived as a better illustration of a fragment, where they saw the fragment within its story context. And we found that people strongly favored images generated from scene descriptions compared with the other prompting strategies that use the story text directly. So these no context, verbose context, and succinct context strategies. So the table here shows that people chose the scene description strategy over the succinct context strategy in 73% of cases. So that was the strongest baseline, the succinct context one. But even in that case, the scene descriptions were favored. So similar results were found for the no context and verbose context strategies. So the takeaway of this finding is that, and really to fully take advantage of text image models for story visualization, it seems like you need to go beyond the story text, and your prompt needs to specify what's visually evoked by the story. And as I already kind of alluded to earlier, another way to view this result is that a lot of knowledge that's useful for visualization is not always explicitly stated in the story, but it can be easily inferred. And text image models seem to require this inferred information to be spelled out in order to produce effective visualizations. Okay, but what I didn't yet address is where the scene descriptions are supposed to come from. So it would obviously be impossible for a human author of a story to write out a scene description for every possible fragment a reader would want to visualize, because the number of fragments are infinite. It sounds like we need maybe another generative AI model that can write text. Of course, this is what large language models, or LLMs, do. And potentially LLMs can act as a story visualization interface, so to speak, by transforming fragments into scene descriptions. So going back to the previous example with the scene description, you may have already guessed that this scene description was generated by an LLM. So now I'm just revealing the complete design behind this. And in the findings that I just discussed, that all of these scene descriptions were LLM generated. So there's many different ways you could prompt the LLM to generate a scene description. For example, you could have something along the lines of, imagine an AI system will be used to generate visualizations for story fragments. Your task is to read a fragment along with a story context and write a scene description that specifies how to visualize the fragment. And maybe you include some representative examples of inputs and outputs you expect to help guide the LLM to do this task. This is an excerpt from the prompt that was used in the study that I just discussed. Okay, so now I want to go through a brief code tutorial of how the basic functionality behind this visual e-reader that I just illustrated can be implemented. So the code is available at the repo link that I pasted here. The notebook is example.pymb. So just to summarize what's going on here, so we'll first load template, and that's what will be used to generate the scene descriptions. In this prompt template, the language slightly differs from the language I showed for the for the prompt on the previous slide. But like I said, there's a lot of different ways this prompt can be written. The core design here is that the prompt takes a fragment and its story context as input, and then the output is expected to be a scene description. So there's many different ways that you can prompt the model to get that. So we'll take a story, a slightly different story in this case, that actually has a kind of a similar structure to the other example, in having like a 5 sentence format. These stories come from actually a specific data set called the Rock Stories corpus, and this has been a really valuable data set in NLP for studying story generation and story understanding. In this case, the story is Lisa has a beautiful sapphire ring. She always takes it off to wash her hands. One afternoon, she noticed it was missing from her finger. Lisa searched everywhere she had been that day. She was elated when she found it on the bathroom floor. So if we have the template that expects a particular story and a fragment to be filled into the template, we can fill that in. And for the fragment that we want to visualize here, let's start with the first sentence in the story. Lisa has a beautiful sapphire ring. This code uses one particular platform for interacting with publicly available models via API. It's called Replicate. There's other equivalent platforms out there. And obviously, you can also use model APIs from a specific company like OpenAI or Anthropic. You just need to obtain an API key from whatever platform you're using. So here, the specific LLM I'm using to generate a scene description is Llama 3 from Meta, and this is one of the more popular open weight models. So we call Llama 3 via the Replicate API to get a scene description. So we get a close-up of Lisa's hand, the beautiful sapphire ring prominently displayed on her finger, sparkling in the light, set against a soft neutral background to emphasize the ring's vibrant blue color. And once we have the scene description, we can use it as the prompt for the text image model. So the specific text image model I'm calling here is Flux from Black Forest Labs. This particular version that I'm calling of Flux is not yet open weight, but historically, the Black Forest Labs organization has released weights for certain models. If we call the model, also using the Replicate API, we get an image depicting this fragment that we selected. And then, of course, we can repeat this same process for any other selected fragment of the story. So if we want to visualize the last sentence in the story, we reassemble the LLM prompt from the template with this particular fragment instead. So if we want to see, she was elated when she found it on the bathroom floor, we specify that. And then we call the LLM again with this fragment to get a new scene description. A young woman overjoyed bends down to pick up a sapphire ring from the white tile of the bathroom, etc. And once again, we can call the same text image model to get a new image, and we now have a visualization of that fragment. So this can be done for any selection of the story. Okay, so the final thing that I want to show is a user interface that I put together that demos the user interaction or proposed user interaction for this fictional visual e-reader app. So there is some latency with the models. So instead of a live demo, I'm just playing a video here of me interacting with this app. The code for this is also available in the repo under the Visual e-reader directory. This is experimental prototype that I personally developed. It's definitely not a product with any planned release. I used a generative AI tool called Lovable to develop the front end for this app. So it's something I developed with a day's worth of effort in this context of it being an experimental prototype. I want to make a disclaimer that there's definitely some bugs, but I was really happy to be able to use this tool to turn an idea into a demoable prototype. And the particular story being visualized here is called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And this is a short story that was published in 1892. So it's now part of the public domain. If you haven't read it, it's a work of horror fiction about a woman confined to a room. If you look into the code, you'll see some interesting details that I won't have time to fully discuss now. But for example, like the full story is too long to fit into Llama 3's maximum length context window. So the text is truncated to include 200 words before and after each selected fragment. And that's making the simplifying assumption that that context is enough to know how that fragment should be visualized. Also, the image generation prompt is suffixed with some instructions for controlling the visual style of the resulting images, and that's why there's some consistency to the style of these images and looking like they're drawn in. So that's another thing that you can do with text image models is actually just prompt with words what kind of style you want the resulting image to have. Okay, so to wrap up, this is to summarize what I covered today. Visualization can provide new opportunities to engage with text-based stories. Text-to-image models are useful for on-the-fly visualization, and LLMs can support this visualization by verbalizing visual scenes. Something to note for the future of this work is that there's emerging opportunities to expand story engagement to other modalities beyond images. So, for example, there's models that can generate videos and sound from text in the same way that we can similarly apply image generation models. So that's it. Thank you. And I can take questions.
This is awesome and a bit mind-blowing with all the applications and the implications. And I'll just go ahead with the first question, but I promise I will not take up all the space. I was thinking, as generative AI becomes a powerful collaborator in storytelling, it raises an important question about the role of human creativity. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on best practices for integrating human and AI workflows in story creation so that AI augments rather than overrides the human creative vision?
Yeah, yeah. So I think like with a lot of just my own interaction with these models, you end up seeing how much manual curation goes into the process of like figuring out if you have a particular target in mind, let's say for story visualization, you have to go through a lot of outputs to get to a point where you're happy with something that demonstrates your particular vision. So it's really not the type of thing where you can just kind of like plug this into a pipeline or a model and you're guaranteed to get something that satisfies the vision that you have. So I think this sort of like iterative and curation process, it's maybe different from like traditional ways of creating content where you start from a vision and then you have like full control over each step of the process to get exactly what you want. It's more of your interaction is like a constant having to like refine and give the AI system more intention about what you're looking for, and you review more outputs and you select those. So it does kind of shift the co-creative process a bit. In some ways, you're sacrificing like a degree of control, but then to get more different candidates for what could be the final vision and it kind of shifts it to a process of curation or like considering different possible visions in order to make the final selection. But at the end of the day, the human creator is the person that, calls the shots about what gets presented as the final piece of content that they're trying to capture with whatever vision that they started with.
That makes sense. I've experimented just a bit on some small tasks related to my work at OpenTeams and image generation, especially related tasks. It takes a lot of back and forth, and the results, the output is still a bit not quite what you envision sometimes. But that
Yeah, yeah. I mean, an example with even just the process of creating these slides, I was using, as you might expect, I was using text image models to generate images for these slides. And I must have gone through like hundreds of different images just to curate the specific ones that I wanted to put in these slides.
I must say the slide deck is beautiful. And
Thank you. Yeah.
I see Nyasha has his hand raised. Nyasha, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Inessa, and also Melissa. Actually, I'm impressed with this application. It's a great one. And just a little, maybe before I ask, so I'm a software development student with Brigham Young University, um, but I do it online from here in Zimbabwe. So I see like this is, you're saying it's more of an MVP product. Do you see yourself making it a SaaS product that eventually you can monetize?
I mean, you definitely could. That's not my particular goal. So I'm a research scientist, so I like to explore visions of technologies. And so a lot of the times that I implement something, I'm really just exploring something from a research perspective, where I want to then evaluate how people interact with it and find out like where are the potential issues and where could the vision go in the future. Um, but my particular goal is often not to sell a product. But yeah, that is the goal of other people, of course. There's a whole like, software ecosystem and we all have different roles that we can play in this. So yeah, I think it's a
Okay. So
community.
I see. So my question was, I graduated this coming December.
Mhm.
So I'm looking for more of collaborations, internships, or ways that I can put my in-class skills into the world and see what I can make at the end of the day. So I'm asking, are you looking for a collaborator or someone that can maybe help you along the way with the app?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I don't have like there aren't any formal opportunities that my team has right now available. But what's great about being part of the academic research community is that there's always the potential for collaboration because our focus is always on publishing our work and getting it out there. And once it's out there, anyone can engage with it. So that's like one thing that I really enjoy with being part of this community is that there is an emphasis on constantly sharing results, sharing prototypes, sharing everything. And then you can always have a conversation that starts from that. So definitely happy to chat further about opportunities like that.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm just an investor with OpenTeams. I'm amazed growing up in the 40s and 50s. I could never have conceived of anything like this. This is truly a miracle how these things can come about. It's just really remarkable. I'm just so impressed. I hope I live long to be able to see more fruition of this come about because it's unbelievable. Yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for all you researchers and for Olga. I just sit back and watch it take place. It's great, great feeling.
Yeah, I've been amazed by this too, honestly. Yeah, even just in the last year, really, since joining Midjourney Storytelling Lab, I was new to text image models. I mean, they've only been around for a few years, but interacting with them more, I did not necessarily foresee all of these capabilities that have come about. So I'm just as surprised as anyone else as well.
I was lucky enough to watch the Python movie a couple weeks ago in Austin at the Alamo Draft House. That was pretty phenomenal.
Oh, okay. Wow, cool.
Lucky Brian, I couldn't make it. It was a bit of a journey for me from Florida, but
Yeah.
it's available online, and I'm going to share a link in the chat here. Yes, definitely check it out. Like knowingly or unknowingly, sometimes we're all rely on Python, and learning about the journey was very interesting to me, even being part of this community for nearly 8 years now. I have
Travis, yeah,
Go
Travis Oliphant's an amazing man. Travis Oliphant, what an amazing man. Yeah.
Brian, and I'm so glad to see you joining us. I heard great things about you, and it's great to put face to the name. Melissa, I have a question that uh, I know a lot of people in my indie filmmaking community, my friends from the indie filmmaking community have, is that, there is like Tinseltown is very afraid of applications of AI, and maybe for good reasons, maybe not. But I'm curious, like, for you at the forefront of this development, what new roles do you see emerge in this storytelling space?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
What
The
new
last part.
roles, like new jobs, new roles do you see emerge in the storytelling space?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I recognize all of the controversies in the movie industry regarding these models. But there are actually many people who are embracing them. And one specific opportunity that this has opened up that some of my research has looked at that I didn't discuss today is the opportunity for pre-visualization. So when you're in the process of making a movie, a big part of it, a conventional part of making a movie is like you have some initial storyboarding or sets of visualizations that kind of convey the vision of where the movie could go during the production process. And that is like a particular area where generative AI can be particularly useful in being able to explore rapidly a lot of different potential directions that a project could go. And I think there's going to be a shift to putting more resources into that stage of the process and leveraging generative AI more. So I don't know about like specific roles. I think there certainly will be more collaboration with people in the tech space to support these new opportunities in pre-visualization. But I think I know there's a lot of fear around people just like not having their own roles anymore, the roles going away because it's being replaced by generative AI, and that's not because I see so many new opportunities and shifting ways that people are doing things currently. I just see a lot of new opportunities for people who weren't otherwise included in this process in the first place to get involved and for it just to be more of a collaborative thing across a lot of different people.
I remember back in 1953 when everybody was worried about computers taking over the world and people
Yeah.
losing jobs. Oh my goodness. We had no idea. And I worked for IBM for 25 years, so
Wow.
I saw the changes taking place. But even during my time, I sold computers. I sold a 500,000 bytes of memory for $500,000.
Wow.
Can you imagine 1/2 meg for $500,000? And it was the size of about 6 refrigerators at least.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The times have changed for sure. Yes, and I was thinking to myself is that like we all need to be prepared to be prompt engineers, because like whatever we do, AI tools will be right next to us, and developing this skill, asking good questions, modifying your questions, being a prompt engineer will be a very useful skill.
Yeah, and it's interesting because yeah, prompt engineering, it has this fancy name that kind of makes it unclear what it's referring to, but in a lot of ways prompt engineering is just clear communication. And as someone like I write a lot of prompts and times that I'm not necessarily getting the results that I want out of a model, I go back and look at the prompt and realize like I wasn't expressing my intention clearly in the first place, and like another human wouldn't necessarily know what I mean if I gave the prompt to them either. So yeah, so I think like prompt engineering actually does like get at a more general skill than the term suggests, which is just communication.
Yasha, you have another question. Go ahead.
Mine is not a question, rather, but maybe a contribution to this app. Um, I understand it's basically for research purposes, but I was thinking that maybe if it could have a conversational interaction with AI models, for instance. I'm sure you all know of 11 Labs, where you can clone a voice and then in this case, there's a picture generated, and then there's a background voice somehow describing the whole scene. You know, as people, we want to feel something when we read. We want to connect in a way. So I was thinking maybe in the future, if someone goes ahead with the app, they can later on integrate 11 Labs or any other alternative, and then they can ship it. Maybe it will be something that can be helpful to people. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's just so many new opportunities with incorporating different modalities. And so, yeah, being able to just speak and have some image expressing your words. I mean, that Midjourney is doing this already on their site. But there's other opportunities for different modalities as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine like immersive formats for like, at museums, for example. I always get excited
Yeah.
about like, new formats introduced to uh, museum settings because um, like they have definitely changed from my days being at school, and I
Yeah.
see a lot of it also being like, more enhanced experiences are coming to these settings with adoption of AI.
Definitely.
Well, we have a little more time for questions. Don't have to take it up, but if you have a question, please don't hold back. And if you just want to say hi and express your gratitude for Melissa taking the time out of her busy day to share her knowledge with us, that's fine too.
Hi, and how do we get a copy? You said this is being taped so we can watch it later on.
Yes, I am recording the presentation, and if you want to revisit the highlights, will be posted on OpenTeams YouTube channel in about a week.